Helaine, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you back.
Thanks so much for having me back.
It's been a while. I doing back and research in episode 194 you were on back about 3 years ago. So life's changed a
Wow.
lot since 2021.
Uh, to say the
Yeah.
least.
You got a lot of. I mean, life's changed a lot for you. It seems like just this year in 2024. So a lot of stuff's been going on that I wanted to get into. Congrats on the book launch, by the way. I know that's a big step
Thank
forward.
you very much.
Been on for a while. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
We'll get into that. I actually wanted to start. I'm just kind of curious your emotions, your thoughts around this. A date I wanted to pick out here, February 14th, 2024. Tell me about February,
Yeah.
or tell me about February 14th, 2024.
It was a good date. It was well, the thing you don't know, it's Valentine's Day,
Right.
right? It was Valentine's
Right.
Day. And it happened to be the 10-year anniversary of my back surgery. Um, which is not the headline that you're referring to.
Correct.
The headline that you're referring to that happened to be in the 10-year anniversary of my back surgery, which was the impetus behind City Row, is the date that we actually announced the acquisition of City Row by Water Rower.
Yeah.
So the end of an era,
Yeah.
to say the least.
Now I know, and a lot of this I know is in your book. You with the podcast length, you can't share every detail of the story, just because I know there's a lot that went into that acquisition. But I'm just kind of curious because I do have a lot of founders that, and fortunately for you, like when you were on last time, we talked a lot about getting started, a lot about how the City Road journey started. So now looking backwards and sort of ended, I guess you can say, by acquisition. How do you feel? What's the emotions around it? It's 10 years. You poured your blood, sweat, and tears into it. Like, what are you feeling now on the backside?
Combination of relief, feeling proud, feeling sad, feeling lost,
Hmm.
feeling confused, feeling lack of purpose, feeling elated, feeling excited about a new chapter. It's a lot of complicated feelings, and I try and like hold each of them in the way that they need to be held because it's part of a huge transition. And I'm grateful that I had time to prepare for it, both kind of always knowing that there was going to be quote unquote an end and just not knowing what kind of form that would
Mm-hmm.
take, and having people that had kind of gone through this journey before and that were reaching their hands out to kind of hold me and help me take some baby steps. So I'm still very much in the process of figuring out what happens next, but taking it one day at a time. I'm starting to thaw out a little bit, and I would say we're, as we approach the 4 months and the 6 months since, I start to think, oh wow, I get to take a vacation this summer and maybe actually turn my email off. Like I've never actually done that.
Yeah.
So it's a whole new chapter. And I would say I'm just mostly grateful for the experience and for being able to also turn the page.
When a lot of folks and now obviously 10 years ago, social media was in a different spot than it is today. But when folks are looking at trying to start a business, they might look at someone like yourself or someone else that, hey, they're growing this business and they think it's all sunshine and rainbows, right? They think every day, oh my God, they're rolling in, Scrooge McDuck jumping in the cash and everything. They're having these big parties. That's what probably people think. At least from when people are sharing online. So I'm kind of curious, and maybe this is helpful in terms of advice or ways you think about with working with startup founders and such, how to focus on really what they're worrying about and not worry about what other people are doing, because maybe the story isn't as glamorous as some make it seem.
1000%. I mean, if I could give my first piece of advice, it's don't do it. Like you need to be prepared to be in the arena, being hit at and charged towards and aimed at over and over and over again. So I'm going to tell you not to do it. And if you still want to do it, keep going. This is not for the faint of heart. It's part of why I wanted to write my book from the perspective of let me tell you all the raw, gritty, vulnerable hardships that I went through and why I was well positioned to handle them. And if you still think you want to do it, God bless. But there is an amazing concept in um, in a book called The Endless Game, and it's one of my favorites. And one of the principles is study your worthy competitors, right? So you want to study your worthy competitors, and you want to know what people are doing. And then you want to go put your head down and you want to focus on building. Because the other like fantastic piece of advice that I heard early in my career and I love to share is that you want to put your best people on the opportunity. And the opportunity is often growing the business, it's scaling the business, it's investing in ideation and product. And if your best person, let's say that's you as the founder, is focused on other companies and you're not focused on yourself. You're not focused on your own idea and your own concept. So you really need to like put it in a box and not spiral on what everyone else is doing. And instead, like put all of your creative energies and all of your, anxieties, whatever it is, put it into building. Don't put it on anyone else. It's not fair.
And wouldn't you agree on that note, right? It's if you're always trying, you're almost like going the shiny object syndrome. You're always trying to go for something. Oh, I saw someone else do this. I'm going to do it versus knowing that this is a long game. So if you can stay focused, it might take longer than you are thinking, but you actually can come out on the other end, quote unquote, more successful than you even ever imagined because you're doing it your way. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and Simon Sinek would too, the author of The Infinite Game. And part of that is that like it's actually not necessarily about winning, it's about surviving, right?
Mm.
You have to survive in order to win.
Yeah.
And so many of these companies don't survive, which is why they don't have a chance at winning. And so whatever you can do to survive is going to give you a better chance at quote unquote winning. And so stay fucking focused.
Yeah. Now, if I recall, you said, although all the shit that happened during the company, the tenure, you'd do it again, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Sure will.
Why? What is it? Is
Nope.
it about the growth of the company? Is it about the people you work with? All the above? Like why would you do it again, even knowing all the challenges?
Oh, I mean, what an adventure of a lifetime
Mhm.
that I got to experience. And I got to do with incredible people. I got to meet incredible people. I got to learn and grow for 10 years. I was at the helm of trying to figure out how to build a huge company with an idea that was fucking fantastic and still is, if I'm being honest with you. Like the City Art concept is fantastic. And I'll stand by that until the day I die as being one of the best forms of programming to ever hit the market. I would do it again in a heartbeat because what a time, what a learning,
Yeah.
what an adventure. I still am very close with my two co-founders who I started this business with, and we talk about City Road being our love story. Like that was our story. We got to do this thing, and so was it hard? Absolutely. Was it taxing? Yeah. Do I have like probably more stress on my body than I would have liked throughout the entire time? Yeah, but this is what life is about. You got to jump in. You got to try shit. You got to live. You got to be afraid. And so I got to do all of those things a million times over. Take risks, be vulnerable, go out of my comfort zone for 10 years. Again, like I would have done things a little bit differently, but I really do believe that everyone like has a path and everything happens for a reason. And this was my 10-year journey.
Mm. What can you share some of those things you did different? What are some top
I
of mind?
think Yeah, I mean, I think it's different for me to be on the other side of it, having been growing for 10, 11 years at this point, to be able to reflect back. And I do believe that there are certain things that I never would have signed that first lease in Union Square had I not been naive. Had I realized that I had to like get permits signed, like I probably never would have opened because it would have been cost and time prohibitive. So there's little things that I would have loved to have done differently just to, I don't know, cross some T's and dot some I's. I maybe would have signed one less good guy guarantee personally. When you sign leases, you have to sign good guy guarantees. I probably would have, I would have set better boundaries with employees earlier. All the things that you just learn by doing. I wish I'd done all of those things a little bit differently. And boy, do I wish that I'd seen the COVID hangover a little earlier. Now nobody saw the COVID hangover, right? Not even Peloton, who's still dealing with their COVID hangover. But those are all things like I wish that I could have done differently. But again, like just not how things unraveled. And I do think that, and where I am able to very much sleep at night, and again, just like enjoy the story for what it is and how it ended, even though it did not end in the way that I had wanted it to or fought for 10 years, is that at every point we fought till the final breath.
Mm-hmm.
And I always threw a Hail Mary and I always found a rabbit out of a hat. And I can sleep well because I did everything I possibly could to drive success.
Mm.
And so that's where I can really, you know, hang my hat up and be like, we did it to the best of our ability and to the best of the market's ability.
What? And by the way, you mentioned the good guy guarantee. What is that? I've never heard that.
Oh, Brandon, you clearly haven't signed any leases in New York City.
No,
So
I have
there's
not.
a
No,
very
I have not.
so there's a very unique clause. And I just want to preface this by saying I'm not a lawyer, even though
Okay.
I kind of think
Okay.
in that it's actually to prevent squatters in New York City because the legal process can be so long that they basically say, okay, you can sign a lease on behalf of a corporation, but an individual needs to sign what's called a good guy guarantee that basically puts an individual on the hook for the rent until you give the keys back, until you vacate the premise.
Mm.
So it's basically like you can put the full liability on the business, but it's actually going to be on the individual until you give the keys back. And so you can't just sit around not paying rent for a year and be like, "Oh, I got a shell company," and you're never going to see any money. Like it's to prevent landlords and enable them to re-rent the space.
Okay, gotcha. But that's pretty much a New York City thing, or is that for the most part? Yeah.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned something in your book, and I pull a few things out, but the one thing I loved is, and I think you got it from your grandmother. The joy is the journey.
Yeah.
Joy,
Oh, you read the whole book.
the
Look
joy
at
is the journey. It
you.
was a good book. I well, one thing too, and go back is the vulnerability. That's what I love, and I think I know I picked this up. Is one of the reasons I wanted to have you back on is because how vulnerable you were in our first conversation, how direct you are. Cause kind of how I am. I'm like, there's no reason to sugarcoat stuff. Just kind of tell it how it is. So anyways, I appreciate that about the book. But tell me about joy is the journey. Cause when I heard that, I'm like, yeah, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. In terms of no, not thinking about it as like there's a finish line. It's, hey, what's going on? How do you actually get there? What are all the things that go through? So anyways, I'll let you share your perspective, but tell me a little about that and why that's important to kind of use as a perspective.
I'm so glad that you liked it. I loved that, and for so long I wasn't sure how to end this book because spoiler alert, doesn't end in rainbows and butterflies, but it was still a really great story, and it was still the time of a lot of our lives, and it was still really amazing what we did, and so it was very kind of hard to almost like put a bow on something that's so unique. And I really kind of kept coming back to just like being in the moment. And I think I was also able to, hopefully, I've been able to move through this transition, quote unquote, well, even though my friends might think a little bit differently, depending on some of the days that I've had some slight breakdowns. But in part because I had seen this movie so many times that I knew that the end wasn't going to be fantastic no matter what. Like I kind of always knew that either we were going to sell the company and they would totally change it, whoever bought it, and I would kind of hate it as a founder, right? Because you're so connected to this product and this thing. Or maybe it wouldn't work, right? Which I was obviously striving against. Or maybe we would sell, it'd be amazing, and then like it would just like totally change my job and things like that. And so I think throughout the journey I was able to just like kind of take a pause and realize that the epic story that we would eventually tell was happening now.
Mm.
Wasn't happening in the future. It wasn't happening at the February 14th, 2024. That is not the thing that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the morning that me and Ashley and Annie sat on the couch drinking homemade mimosas from Ashley's dad's orange groves and watched the most pivotal PR piece that had ever happened at our company. That's the moments. Those are the moments I want to remember. I want to remember when the clients came up and told me visiting a studio how this thing changed their lives and echoed the reason why I started the business. And so I think we were able to have a good amount of perspective within the journey, because the journey is really the epic story. It's not February 14th.
Well, and when you even think, if we take the fitness perspective of you're on a rower, you could think about, oh, I got to get to whatever 2,000 meters or what 10,000 meters, whatever whatever your goal is. It's really one at a time, and it sounds so dumb. It's like, oh yeah, one at a time, one step at a time, but it's true. I mean, I think about this so much now of how important the present day is. Of like, I can get ahead a year down the road or 2 years down the road, but who cares about that? Because again, if I said 10 years ago, I want you to write the story of how this is going to end for City Road, you would have no idea. You could take a stab at it, right? You can maybe guess, but you have no idea. So why even waste time thinking about it? Do you find that a lot of, I guess, people that are starting businesses, whether they're into it already or maybe they're ruminating an idea, do you feel like they get too far ahead? They jump too far to the conclusion?
Oh, of course. So many of them too. Not just on what's going to happen with the company, but they're 15 steps ahead on so many different projects. And listen, that is healthy, right? You just do want to have like really robust, like forward thinking mentality that can be like, okay, if we go this way, here's what happens 6, 9, 12 months from now. If we go this way, here's what happens 6, 9, 12 months from now. But we can't solve every single problem that's going to happen 6, 12, 9 months from now. We have to know where like the big obstacles are, but not the little ones. Like we have to have confidence that we're going to be able to solve the little things that are going to come up and that we're going to put the right team on those challenges. It's more about having the macro sense and then just like chipping away one thing at a time. So many people are spiraling so much on a daily basis. It's really kind of wild. And I think they're also getting a little clouded depending on who their investors are, depending on when they took money. And I wish more founders were more confident in their vision for what they're building and why, and didn't let, to your point, like didn't let other people like influence what their vision is, because you're a founder for a reason. If you've gotten traction, you're doing something right. Listen to your gut. I think a lot of things happen when people raise money and they think they need to entirely listen to investors and not themselves and their gut. And so I see a lot, and I hope that can change a little bit in the future of investment capital.
I want to go back to that for a second, but now that you mentioned investors, would you take investment dollars again if you could do it again?
Great question. I'm currently less interested in that from my own personal eagerness to build companies. I would take far less capital. I'm very interested in businesses that need 1 to 3 million total to get to profitability and scale from there. I am less interested, and again, I think this is just a product of where we are in the like financial ecosystem of startups and venture. Like we are no longer in a frothy market, and so we're way less at a point where we're to throw money everywhere and see what happens. So that's actually just not being rewarded anymore. What's being rewarded is smart, capital efficient businesses, profitability. And I have found that I actually really like those types of businesses, healthy P&Ls versus like, let's spray and pray kind of a thing.
Mhm.
And so I am not currently interested in raising a ton of venture capital, but I do really like ideas that need just like a little bit of seed capital and then can grow really like in a healthy way, not in like a we're going to spend 10K to make 5. Like those days are over.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if you could build the foundation, you could take less money, most likely, right? Uh, and you own more of that. You have more control. To go back to the vision, right? You can kind of keep your vision versus feeling like you have to sway to what others are thinking. Let's go
Yeah,
back.
I think let's also
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, like, let's build healthy P&Ls. I think for 7, 8 years, the founders were not focused on the right economics for the most part, and I'm excited to see where this next phase goes. Actually,
So let's go back though. So let's say someone's starting, and we talked about that kind of how do you get the vision, but how do you not get too far ahead? Is there anything you coach on of like how to structure? So that could be I don't know if it's quarterly goals, if it's certain KPIs to look at. You can pick it wherever you want, but I'm kind of curious if someone's feeling like they're all over the place. How do you get them more focused on the short path ahead?
oh, I mean, I make everybody make lists all the time. I have a very seasoned founder friend of mine who is taking some early steps before he decides to raise money. And he's just like, am I ready? Am I ready? like, I don't know if I'm ready. And I'm like, you have to make a list of like what has to be true for you to feel comfortable raising money. And I was like, break it into each bucket of the business. Legal, can you do this? Marketing, do you think there's a path for this? Like, do this analysis, like, and try and make it very black and white, where like you can take specific actions on each piece to then say, okay, if all these things are true, then I'm going to raise money. But I also really force people to think about the analogy of like, you can't boil the ocean, right? You can't, like, not one thing is going to happen and all of a sudden you're going to know every single answer. You have to boil one pot of water at a time. So find out what each little thing is, like one at a time. Focus on marketing today, legal tomorrow, whatever it is. Make your little list and say, okay, if all these things are true, then I'm going to go raise money. And I'm going to raise money because I'm going to be able to say all these things are true. Here was how I thought about when it made sense to actually raise money. I made a list. I broke it into categories. Here's the list. And I, based off of X, Y, and Z, determined that all of these things were true. And that's why we're having this conversation right now. And then I force everyone just to continue to think about what that execution plan is, and say do is like the biggest piece of advice that I give any founder or anyone managing investors or key stakeholders, is to constantly say do. Say you're going to do something, and then in the next communication, say that you did it, or say why you didn't do it, or say you tried to do it and failed. But there's nothing better than watching an entrepreneur say do over a period of time, because then when it comes time to ask the investor or the stakeholder for help or money, they've watched you execute very tactically versus like pie in the sky ideas all over the place. And so a founder really does need to get crisp on what's happening. And sometimes that might mean bringing in someone to help if that's not how their brain works.
Well, I like the say do, because I mean this could be for anyone that just wants to start. Maybe they have a side hustle. They're still in corporate America. And I was talking with my mentor actually yesterday. We were talking about this a little bit, but like, how do you just take some small action, right? So because you could talk all day, but until you take an action, nothing's going to happen anyways, right? And you won't even be able to build out any idea or any business until you take action. So I'd like the say it, but also then take action and do it. I think that's a good mantra for people to have, for sure.
It works.
Um, so I want to. You also talk about these, and because I think the mindset is such a big thing when starting. You talk about these startup life reopening childhood wounds,
Mm.
and I imagine you're not alone. I mean, I could relate to that, and I'm sure others can. So, how do you help others kind of, and maybe you start with your own story, but in terms of all the crap in their head of why they're not good enough, why they can't start, why they're, someone else is better suited. Why is that maybe a positive, or how do they use it as a positive to actually start?
Yeah. Once again, thanks for reading the book. I think everybody, first and foremost, another thing I talk about a lot is being self aware and knowing where your personal landmines are. It only makes you better and stronger. I talk a lot about, growing up as a shy, chubby kid and being made fun of and not being cool at all those classic things definitely fueled me to want to fight, right? To want to win. I'm also really competitive. And so that definitely has this like inner fire inside of me. And I can kind of tie those two things back. But there's also a level of like, wow, I still am, like, a piece of me is her, right? And so I'm going to carry that with me. And then, when I'm in the arena and someone hits me, like they might hit me in that spot, and it's going to hit a little bit harder. And the first time they hit it, like it might knock me down, and then the next time they hit me there, like I'm more prepared for it, and so it might knock me down for a little bit less time. And so that's kind of how I think about like knowing who you are both today and in the past, and being able to like put the right armor up, or work with people to like, remove the soft spots, so to speak. But it totally impacted me in City Row. And I think it would have impacted me had I started any company. It was just exacerbated by the fact that I started a fitness company, which is almost like, it's kind of funny. It's a really good story, but I think everybody has, and a lot of women that I work with particularly, like there's so many women that just don't have confidence. Even, I was on a call yesterday with a founder and just like, but how do I ask for money? And I was like, you just ask. Like, you just say, okay, fantastic. I'm so glad you like it. Like, are you interested in participating? And I was like, you have to shift the mentality from they're doing you a favor to you're doing them a favor.
Mhm.
Like, you could let them in on like the next $1 billion thing. And like just helping them shift that mindset a little bit. Everyone needs to hear it a little bit differently. But the second you hear like the unlock, hopefully you can, that's another piece of armor, another step up in being able to grow into a little bit more of like a confident founder. That's like the confidence is the biggest one. It affects everyone.
Yeah. Well, I see that a lot from sales mentorship I do is like folks are scared to ask for the business. And I said, listen, you're on the phone call. You're doing a value to them. It's not just, oh, thank you, sir. Thank you for coming on the call. It's like you should be on the same level. And I think, yeah, you're right. Confidence is like, and I wonder, so is that, you think the confidence is just because the imposter syndrome, people haven't done it before? Or do you think it's tied to like, again, just not having a good childhood and having like kind of been quote unquote beat down of like, not being good enough. And then that surfacing into, well, I'm not good at doing anything. Or is it, maybe it's a mix, I guess. I don't know.
I think it's a combination, and everyone's like a unique snowflake, so to speak. But I don't think that anybody really likes to ask for money, or I mean, it comes down to people not wanting to be vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
and people not wanting to fail. And whether you're asking for the sales business, or you're asking for an investor pitch, or you're asking someone to do something that they don't want to do, nobody likes doing that, right? We also don't like saying no because we don't like making people feel uncomfortable. But when you have to also step into business, like we're here to do business. Like I want you to ask for the money, and if they don't want to talk to you again, okay, no problem.
Right.
Like it's also about appropriately setting up boundaries for conversations and things like that in a business setting. Like I told this woman on the phone yesterday, I said, before you get on the phone with somebody, if you think it's an investor conversation, you might just want to say, are you guys actively writing checks? If so, what's your average check size? Do you have any particular like theses that you're working within? Like I want to make sure it's a good use of both of our time. Let's set things up well from the beginning. And that should make the ask a little bit easier.
Mm. So are you finding like they're taking calls and they're not even confirming what the call is about, the agenda, and why people are actually on there?
Maybe.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. A lot of work to be done. You have any free time?
Well, it's just, and again, I guess partly because I think the challenging thing is there is no playbook, right? There's so much information out there, and you kind of have this paradox of choice of like, I have so many different things I can do when I'm in this, of trying to start. Again, maybe it's I'm at a point where I want to take investor dollars, and it seems like there's so many options on there. Like, how do you? Maybe that's what your book's for, right? It's like, here's like a raw perspective of how it actually can be done or is done, and not just the sugarcoat. Because I think that's a lot of the information is like sugar coated online, but I'm like, there's no depth to it.
I agree. I also think people need to know that it's a real hustle. Like this isn't one day where like I got a great idea, I'm going to put a business plan together, and like overnight I'm going to raise money.
Mhm.
It is way, way, way harder than that. Are people going to hit lightning in the bottle and like have the most amazing story of all time? Yes. Are some people going to like maybe raise from the first investor they ever spoke to? Sure. Is that 95, 99% of people? No. You got to talk to 100 investors, if not more. So buckle up. I mean, like, I get on the phone and people are like, this is horrible. I hate this process. And I'm like, do you want to keep going or you want to fold? And I just want people to know that that's what they're getting into before they start.
Yeah. Well, it even goes back to, you said it, even if you don't take an investor, or if you prolong that, it's the steps, like going back to what you said with the, opening up that first location. Remind me on the, how did you run the classes right at the beginning? Like, remind me on that, because you were still in corporate, right? And kind of doing some stuff. Can you remind me on that? Because I think that's so important, is this prototyping of like slowly building versus feeling like you just got to throw all the chips on the table and put everything in, right? I think that's where a lot of folks struggle too. Could you share a little bit about that? Remind me on that, the beginning stage.
Yes. I really wanted to do proof of concept and crawl, walk, run. Like the vision was always to have, this is before the digital idea came to be, but I'm like, we wanted to be this whole cycle of rowing and strength training. We wanted to be the next Barry's, whatever it was. But for the first one, we had to see if the concept worked. And I constantly was assessing demand and testing the product. And that started by throwing a website up, right? Basically free. sign up here for the next big thing. We started talking about it as if it was already happening. And then we were like, oh God, people actually signed up for it. Now we can go build what I like to call our first pancake, right? Our first location was the first pancake. It was messy. The batter wasn't perfect, but you could kind of eat it. And people actually loved it. And so from there, we were like, okay, the first one works. Now we can go raise more money. I didn't want to raise $4, $5, $10 million for something that I didn't know was going to work. And I do think that because they're so, startups have kind of been romanticized in a lot of ways. This story is really amazing. The ones that we hear, right? They sell for billions of dollars. Like, it's unbelievable. We don't hear the story of the ones that were an acqui-hire, that were an asset sale, that dissolved, that kind of just threw the brand to somebody else for $2 or $3. Like, that's actually the norm of what's going to happen. And I think that I'm really interested now, again, in the place that we are in the ecosystem of startups, where you got to be a little bit scrappier earlier on, and profitability is king, and proof of concept is king, and scrappiness is king, or queen, excuse me. And so really forcing people to think about, how can I do this without money, is going to create probably healthier companies. Like, there's a lot of theories going on right now that, like, the next generation of billion-dollar companies are being built now because they have to think a little bit differently. And I'm really interested in that cohort of companies, particularly ones where the founder can put in a little bit of their own capital, raise friends and family, and get really fucking far. Then let's almost put almost like private equity capital behind it, right? Because it's so far along versus what we've been seeing for the past, 8 years is like, I have an idea and I haven't done anything about it yet, but I've got a great CTO, so I need $10 million.
Yeah.
Like, those days are kind of behind us. So let's start building again.
Yeah. Well, that's why and folks listening, I check out, Basecamp. I love what they do. I had David on, and actually Jason Fried's coming on next week, the co-founders. And I just love what they built. They've never, they didn't take, I think they had a few dollars here, but they basically own the company. They haven't tried to go IPO. They haven't tried to like make it massive. They've kept it within their means, and it's been profitable for 20 years. And like, that concept, I think, could be replicated. To your point, I think the financial side of things are changing a lot. So being able to actually build it from the ground up is not a bad way to go, and really be smart about it.
I also think that there's something really interesting in this. And just thinking about what you want, right? Think what you want as a founder. Like, why are you doing this? Do you want money? Money doesn't make people happy. So, like, why are you actually doing this? And you have to have a why, a very real why. I spoke to an unbelievable Israeli founder a few weeks ago, and we had a very candid conversation. And he said, I want to sell this company for $1 billion. And I said my line. I was like, well, money doesn't make you happy. Why do you want to do it? And he started really talking about his passion for changing education. Mm. And it has nothing to do with his startup. And I saw him light up, and I was like, okay, this guy has a why. He's gonna figure that out. And so everyone really does need a why of like why you're starting this thing. Otherwise, you're gonna peter out at some point. It can't be money. And something I ask every founder before I work with them, because otherwise there's just like really no substance behind it, in my opinion.
Was he building the company then so that he could use that money to do the other thing? Okay. Yeah. It's a means to an end. All right. I like that.
Yeah, I did too.
What was the hardest thing that you put in the book, or the hardest thing to actually put in the book, like to share?
There were a lot of things that I couldn't put in, like legal things.
Sure.
That I really wanted to.
Of what is in there, I guess. Yeah.
Honestly, the childhood stuff was really hard. Just because it did really kind of open up those wounds to talk about. There's a story about my grandfather that was really hard to write, but was also very true and very impactful, that I wanted to help frame a little bit of who I was. And talking about camp and being like just having to rehash all of my childhood trauma for the book. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to write a memoir. I wanted to write a business book. But the more I dug in and signed with my agent and my publisher, the more they made it pretty clear that women want to hear stories, and women are mostly people that are reading books in general. and that particularly if it's a business book, that it would probably resonate better in the market if it was a little bit more of a memoir. And we saw an opportunity and a path to tell the full story. So I would say that was really hard. And then in real time, so I submitted the manuscript last summer, which
Okay.
was in the middle of the M&A process. So it was very hard to talk about the ending before it had actually happened. And so the first version of this book the ending was very different because it actually hadn't ended yet. And then in the fall, when I got the draft back and I could make edits, I changed it to be a little bit closer to where it actually landed. It was very hard for me. And, I would get probes from my editor to say, like, well, how did this make you feel? And what would you have done differently? And can you like pick yourself up a little bit? And I'm like, no, I actually can't because I am in it and it really sucks right now. And I'm burnt out and it's dragging on. And so it was really hard for me to write the ending. And then, which was just fucking wild, is that after I submitted the final manuscript on December 15th, and I was the kind of person that would have kept working on the manuscript until the last day if they let me, a material change happened in January. And I mean, I don't think I'm giving away the whole story, but the company that we've been working with for 6 months to sell the business pulled out on the closing call. And I had written the ending on December 15th as if that was happening. So I had to email my editor and say, hey guys, just like I have a material change to the ending. Like, is there any way I can just change like 3 pages? And they were probably so annoyed with me, but thank God they said yes. So I would say that like trying to be vulnerable in the ending while it was happening was very hard. And I almost wish I could look at it right now and kind of reshare it from my perspective a few months out. So those were probably the 2 hardest pieces for me.
So obviously with February 14th and all that, like were they able to, they allowed you, I guess it's your book, but maybe there were certain parameters. Like when did you officially submit the final like pages?
So we knew that this change was going to happen in mid-January, and we had signed preliminary paperwork at the end of January or middle to end of January about where it was actually going to land. And there was like very little chance that anything was going to change after that. It took us about 30 days to like route the paperwork and everything like that. And so once I knew that change was happening, I immediately emailed the publisher. So probably end of January, I was able to change 3 pages and nothing else.
Okay. Why did you decide on, so obviously you're launching it June 18th. Why did you pick that day? Why?
I love that you think I picked that day. I had nothing to do with that day. That's all.
I don't know.
Sure.
I'm just,
When you work,
I'm always looking at the timeline of like launch, not, we might not have time to get in all this, but like just like the launch process, like the build up to it. Why June? Why not August? Whatever. I don't know.
I mean, August sounds like a bad month. Apparently June's actually a good month to launch a book.
Okay.
July is bad because it's like a bunch of other types of people launch books. But I think the timing is really great and interesting. And listen, the timeline for this is like almost 4 years. I started writing this book during COVID with my ghostwriter, not knowing where it was going to go. I signed with my agent. When did I sign my agent? Like almost 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then we sold it to Post Hill Press about 18 months ago. Mm. So it has been a long journey and it's changed and taken very different forms. For instance, the initial book I was writing before everything started to implode was a much more rainbows and butterflies book. It was going to be more of, I want to tell this story from my perspective before we win, so to speak. And I get tainted because I knew I'd be tainted. Like I always knew that the ending was going to be like, was going to hurt in one way or another. And so I do think that you talk about the joy is the journey. I really lived every moment of City Row as if the ending was going to hurt in one way or another. And that's why I wanted to write the book early. Little did I know that over the next 3 years, the company would basically have to go through a tsunami. And that would be the beginning of the end. And I would get to write it in real time. So I'm really grateful that I got to write the book as the company was ending. I think it would have been a very different book otherwise. But it is a lengthy process, particularly if you want to go the legacy publisher route, which I ended up going with.
Why did you decide to write the book in the first place? Like, why did you decide to get a ghostwriter in 21?
I did not decide to write this book. A woman that works for me decided that it was time to tell the stories,
Ah,
and I was bored during COVID.
oh, okay.
So I started walking and dictating stories to her.
Mm,
And then we kind of turned it into like a proposal. And for me, it was just like a little fun side project. But you can ask my friends and family, I like forgot that this was happening for like 2 years. Like I did not like think that I was writing a book because it was such an afterthought compared to what I was doing day to day. It was just like, oh, I have a weekly call with Leanne and we talk. Like it was just a talking situation. And then I'd be like, yeah, no, I signed with an agent and no, it's going to be called Making Waves. And my literal best friends were like, I'm so sorry. What are you talking about? Because it was such a little thing of my week compared to everything else. To your point, it's like one little thing of it at a time
yeah.
ended up culminating in this book. But she was the one that had conviction way before I did.
Mm.
And she was right. There are really good stories in there. I mean, you tell me.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think I read a lot of books, and I'll tell you the ones I put down quickly are the ones that are they're very text heavy. It seems like it's almost they're trying to be too intelligent. Like there's all these stuff. Like that's what I love story, but that's why I love like Ryan Holiday is one of my favorite authors. Like I love just reading those like stories. So yeah, like I said, I think you get vulnerable in there, you share a lot of deep stuff, and you paint the picture what people should be hearing if they're trying to start. They don't need the sunshine and rainbows. Those days will be there. They need to know, what am I getting into? So I think that's really important. What's your hope as a takeaway? If someone reads it. By the way, did you do the audiobook?
I am,
Are you
yes.
for your recording? Okay, good. Awesome. All right.
Yeah.
Good to hear.
Oh, yeah.
What's your takeaway? Like what do you hope people get out of this?
You hit the nail on the head. It's what people should be hearing before they jump in. I want them to read the inspirational Shoe Dogs and Ride of a Lifetimes, and you should follow your favorite entrepreneur on social and whoever that might be. You have to have that North Star. But as I say, like, jump into the thing, do the thing, start boiling your first pot of water, but at the same time, be real about the fact that you're jumping into something and it's going to be cold water and there's going to be some creatures lurking below the surface. So let me show you what's lurking below the surface. And if you still want to jump in, then I think you're going to be that much more smarter and more empowered as to what might come next.
Love it. Helaine, so what's next for you? Like, what do you share what you're doing now? Where folks can say hello to you? What's going on?
They can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram at Helaine Knapp. I am having so much fun in this post City Row era. I didn't know how much fun you could have just consulting and advising for a wide range of businesses. I am working with friends, doing insanely cool projects, and we're doing a little bit of, consulting for really early stage in the operational capacity. I have some fractional executive work I do. I work with an amazing woman who's building an adaptive clothing wear company called
Oh,
Slick Chicks. We're actually bringing something really useful to the market for people that have been wildly underserved. So it's a really fun one for me. I'm also doing another impact consulting project with my friend Sarah, who's the CEO of a company called Loop and Tie.
mm,
It's actually a corporate choice-based gifting platform. It's actually huge. It's all focusing on a marketplace that provides people an opportunity to pick a gift from a small business, maybe, women owned, people of color. Like it's an unbelievable gifting platform. Obviously, they do their own swag and whatnot too. But instead of sending your clients like a sweatshirt, let them pick something that they actually want, like a disco ball or like a house plant, or maybe they want to donate to charity because
mm,
they're minimalists and they live in their van. You know what I
yeah.
mean? So anyway, I'm having a lot of fun, focusing a little on women, focusing on impact. I'm taking a couple of board seats, and I'm just trying to sink my teeth into a lot of fun different projects and work with epic
I
humans.
love that. Are you still rowing?
I do row. I'm really into strength training right
Okay.
now. I'm still really into my tennis game. I'm dabbling in pickleball
Oh,
because everyone else is playing pickleball and I like to be social and not everyone wants to play tennis with me. So I'm being active, I'm having fun. I'm going to enjoy the summer. I'm going to have some fun this summer.
yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, okay, congrats on the book. Thanks for coming back on and chatting. This is a lot of fun, and I'm sure a lot of folks can not only take away from this conversation, but your book as well.
Thank you for having me. This is really fun.